Welcome back to 5 Minute History, the weekly series where patrons choose the topic. This one comes from somebody who didn't share their name, so I can't really say who it was from, but it's a topic I've always wanted to do, and it's been one of the most requested topics on this channel for probably 2 years now, honestly. Honda Point, the United States Navy's worst ever maritime disaster. This is not going to be 5 minutes. On the night of September 8th, 1923, one of the most catastrophic peacetime accidents in US naval history occurred off the coast of California near Honda Point, also known as Point Pedernales. Today, we simply though refer to it as the Honda Point disaster. In a single evening, 7 US Navy destroyers ran aground on the rocky shoreline, resulting in the loss of 23 sailors' lives and the destruction of multiple, for the time, modern destroyers. But how and why did it happen? Well, there are a few factors that all worked together at once to create what effectively was the perfect storm. If this was cable TV or Foxtel, it would be now where we go to the underlying epic music and talk about links in the chain of events. But to be honest, this case, it's actually very true. A lot of things had to go wrong to make this happen. In 1923, the US Navy and most navies in the world were coming to terms with the new treaties that were being drawn up to avoid another naval arms race, kind of like the one that had been seen preceding the Great War. The immense battle fleets were being downsized and squadrons of lighter ships were actually being treated seriously for once. In the case of the United States, this was pretty new, given that before the war, the United States, while having a very impressive battle line, severely lacked screening vessels in significant numbers when compared to Germany or the British Empire. Just to give you an idea, when the Titanic sank, the USS Chester escorted, and the Chester is actually one of my favourite cruises ever. I mean, look how nice it looks. Escorted in the Carpathia into port. Chester was one of the only US cruisers in 1912. The only. There weren't many protected cruisers, or scout cruisers, or light cruisers, whatever you want to call them at the time, in the United States Navy. There were heavier armoured cruisers, such as the St. Louis class, but in terms of lighter armoured screening cruisers, there really were not many. US Congress was giving money for the battle fleet, it was not giving money for screening ships. One of these new squadrons of lighter vessels was a destroyer squadron numbered 11, which composed entirely of 4-stacker Clemson-class destroyers, showcased on screen in World of Warships throughout this video. This isn't sponsored, I just thought it would be nice to have a moving model, and Wales has a very nice Clemson-class model, so that's all. The Clemson class was fast, agile, and capable of speeds exceeding 35 knots, while packing significant torpedo armaments supported by a decent defensive battery. Following exercises at sea on the 8th of September, the squadron, consisting of 14 destroyers led by Captain Edward H. Watson aboard the USS Delphine, was returning from exercises in Puget Sound, Washington, to their home port of San Diego down the California coast. Led by Delphine, the 14 ships of the squadron steamed southward at over 20 knots, with a few of the other vessels in the squadron remaining behind to deal with a ship that had recently discovered that it had been wrecked, and taking off survivors. On the 8th of September 1923, as evening settled in, on what can be described as a very routine and mundane journey, everything would be completely normal, and nothing would be going wrong until about 9 o'clock that night, when visibility dropped drastically. Captain Watson, in command of the squadron aboard Delphine, believed his ships had reached a point just south of the Santa Barbara Channel. According to his calculations, was time to make a sharp turn towards the Santa Barbara Channel entrance. However, Watson's navigator was off, and the ships were actually several miles north of their assumed position and dangerously close to the treacherous coastline near Honda Point. The reason for this navigational error can largely be traced to the flagship and its commanding officer, who held primary responsibility for navigation. Its captain, Lieutenant Commander Donald T. Hunter, also served as the squadron's navigator, effectively overruling his own ship's navigator, Lieutenant Junior Grade Lawrence Blodgett. As Delphine steamed south parallel to the California coast, heavy fog reduced visibility further, forcing Hunter to rely solely on dead reckoning, estimating the ship's position using compass headings and speed after the last sighting of land earlier that morning. There was still some hope in avoiding collision though, as the squadron was equipped with radio direction finding, or RDF, and this technology exchanged several signals with the station at Point Arguello. But the system was still relatively new in 1923, and Hunter distrusted RDF readings and disregarded most of the radio bearings he received, considering them unreliable from untested technology. The crew also refrained from taking depth soundings with fathometer lines, which would have required slowing the ships. So this is another issue in the chain of events. This is reportedly due to the fact the squadron was conducting a wartime speed exercise, and Squadron Commander Watson insisted on maintaining a high-speed run all the way to San Diego, reportedly overruling subordinate officers' requests for soundings to be taken or the ships to be slowed to avoid collision or beaching. Despite the dense fog and fast pace, Watson ordered the ships to remain in close formation, completely trusting Hunter's dead reckoning. He instructed a turn east to the course of 095 at 2100, believing they were entering the Santa Barbara Channel. In reality, the RDF bearings, which later proved accurate, indicated the squadron was still several miles northeast of its assumed position. The premature turn led the Delphine to run aground at Honda Point, with the next 6 ships striking hard shortly after, and a further 2 additional ships hitting the point, but not as fast and not as violently because they had a few minutes to slow down. Again, he had ordered all the ships to maintain a very close formation, so no one had time to turn away. Meanwhile, while this is all occurring, USS Kennedy, which was a bit further back in the formation, intercepted RDF bearings from Point Aguelo to both Delphine and Stoddart. Commander Walter Roper, leading Division 32 at the rear of the formation, Kennedy, Paul Hamilton, Stoddart, and Thompson, correctly suspected that the squadron was too far north. Knowing Watson was unlikely to entertain any objections because he was ignoring everyone under him, Roper ordered the ships to slow down and stop when they reached the supposed turning point. As it turns out, Roper guessed correctly, and this action, and this only his action, by ignoring his commanding officer's orders, saved his ships from grounding. In total, 7 destroyers, Delphine, SP Lee, Young, Woodbury, Nicholas, Chauncey, and Fuller struck so hard that they were wrecked beyond repair. 5 other destroyers narrowly avoided grounding by slowing down or changing course just in time, and 2 did ground but were able to get off the rocks and, not get destroyed. The scenes aboard the grounded ships was complete chaos, with men desperately trying to get off the doomed vessels as waves smashed into their hulls. Fortunately, nearby residents and the crew of a passing merchant ship were able to come to the rescue along with the other US sailors in the region, helping to pull the survivors to safety. Despite the heavy damage, most of the 500 plus sailors survived, with only 23 men losing their lives, mostly from drowning or being trapped in the wreckage. I want to point out the fact that only 23 men died in this situation, at night, can be described as nothing short of a miracle. The Navy was understandably furious, and a court of inquiry focused on Captain Watson and his navigators. The court concluded that the disaster was primarily caused by navigational error compounded by overconfidence and dead reckoning, and a failure to heed warnings from subordinate officers. This is where things get a bit, okay, sure then. Because according to the court, and this is the official position taken today, a key contributing factor was the Japanese earthquake earlier that day known as the Great Kanto Earthquake, and allegedly this earthquake played havoc with the ocean currents and caused the errors in navigation. Now, personally, after reading everything I've read about this to make this video, and, I've read about this before, I think this is a load of BS given that USS Kennedy and Roper listened to RDF and slowed down in a fog blanket near rocks, using a modicum of common sense that apparently wasn't aboard the Delphine's command crew at this time. Yeah, it's easy to sit here after the fact almost 100 years later and point fingers and throw stones, but if you're running a high-speed test in a fog blanket knowingly near the shoreline and ignoring the clear signal that says you're about to turn into rocks, then I'm gonna sit here and judge you. Captain Watson and several other officers were court-martialed and found guilty of negligence. Watson took full responsibility though, sparing many of his subordinates from harsher punishment. He accepted his dismissal from command, later stating they would rather gone down with his ship than see so many of his men perish. It appears the disaster was a bit of a wake-up call for the man. The Honda Point disaster profoundly changed naval navigation practices. The Navy began to emphasize that radio direction finding, an early form of electronic navigation, should actually be listened to. Additionally, the incident reinforced the importance of independent verification, and it started to encourage ship commanders to question orders and to verify positions, rather than blindly playing follow the leader. This kind of lesson would prove invaluable in the future, especially when war finally did come. Today, the wrecks of the Honda Point destroyers still rest beneath the waves, marked by memorial plaques at the site near Vandenberg Space Force Base. The disaster remains probably one of the most embarrassing events in US naval history, but unlike some other nations, the USN, to its credit, took this one on the chin, and it learnt from it, even if they still officially blame it on an earthquake. Thank you for joining me for this 5-minute history You play it on like 3 speed, you'll get 5 minutes. It's already started, hasn't it? The descent into madness. Oh well, it isn't like I have a 5-minute episode next month that was, 30 minutes by the time I completed it about a Japanese tank, right? Right? Like, comment, subscribe. I'll catch you all next time.